What do you do when you have a record label, you've birthed this record label, and you've built it to where you're selling 50, 60,000 copies of these compilation hip hop records? And about 5 years before he was discovered, you had Eminem on your label, but chose not to sign him. And then, what if a short time after that, your entire industry was upended because vinyl was killed off by the digitization of music? Well, we all know how that ended. Unfortunately, vinyl was dead. It's come back since, but it was dead. Well, Matt Theriault, my guest today, takes you on this journey, and he's going to talk to you about kind of hitting rock bottom at 34 years of age after losing his entire business because of technology, gets a divorce, and is now making $7 an hour after he was used to making seven figures. It's a really interesting journey, but it's got a great ending because he discovers the power and the compounding power of passive income from real estate investments. And it's just a great storyteller. You're really going to enjoy this. It is a story of riches to rags, back to riches, and you're really going to get a lot out of this episode. Enjoy. On today's episode of the ThriveMore podcast, I have the pleasure of introducing Matt Theriault. And let me tell you, he has an amazing background here. So he's a U.S. Marine Desert Storm veteran, and he also has built a thriving 15-year career in the music industry as a record producer and label owner. Of course, everyone listening knows that the rise of digital downloads brought a swift and unforgiving end to really anybody in that business doing it the traditional ways. So that left him at age 34, both personally and professionally, trying to figure out what he wanted to do. Matt, made a transition from earning seven figures down to bagging groceries for $7 an hour, a very humbling experience he's going to talk about. And during this challenging time, an unlikely mentor, a grocery store manager, said to him, "Passive income is the final frontier where the average person has a legitimate shot at creating real wealth." And he embraced that. Matt embraced this philosophy as both an entrepreneur and a success coach. So now he continues to expand his business opportunities and portfolio, and he strives to inspire others and help them realize their full potential through proven life-changing business systems and aligning his true purpose of empowering individuals to achieve their own success. So that's a mouthful, but the guy's done a lot. So Matt, welcome to the ThriveMore Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Roger. Thanks for having me. And
you bet.
Listening to that, I was like, wow, yeah, I did do that. And I did.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a lot.
Who is that guy? That guy sounds amazing.
Yeah,
I need to meet that guy.
Yeah, I'm going to get him on my podcast. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So selfishly, we're going to dive right in. And when I say selfishly, I mean for me. I'm a massive music fan, musician, lead guitar in my teens and 20s. And I just music moves my soul. So to hear that you were a record producer, owned a label, and you were there in like the heyday of music before it all kind of went digital, I would love to hear about that journey. And then especially hear about, as things started to change, what that felt like and what that was like going through that.
Sure. I mean, music was never an intention to be a career for me.
Wow.
I started playing the trumpet in the band in sixth grade and went all up. And when I got into high school, I think end of my ninth grade, my freshman year, I got braces. And so that kind of killed my trumpet aspirations because it's very difficult. But I just still love music. And the band teacher was also the musical theater teacher. And I was like, well, she says, you can come do this. And I was like, well, okay, why not? And so I did that. And the very first production was was the performance of Flashdance.
Yeah.
And at the grand finale, they had the big breakdancing finale, right? But there we had a problem. I lived in Irvine, California at the time, and we were short some breakdancers, quite a few. This was back in 83, 84, 83, 84, somewhere there. So she went to the proverbial other side of the tracks to recruit some breakdancers. To no luck, she did find one person that came over and taught us, me and the only other guy in this musical theater class.
Yeah.
But that was like when I was first exposed to hip hop and urban music. And so I was my freshman year. And, it was just such an amazing time for me.
Yeah.
I mean, that it was such a pivotal moment. And so I remember getting my mom that weekend. I was like, we have to go to the music store. We have to go to the music store. And so we went to the music store, and I didn't even know what the artists were or anything. I just started singing it and describing it and like this. And I think we went to 2 or 3 music stores and no one had any idea what we were talking about. But that was like the birth of hip hop in those days.
Yeah.
And that was like
Early.
nobody knew. Like it didn't have the name hip hop, right? It
Yeah.
didn't have rap really attached to it. It was really crazy. But that really turned quickly into me becoming a DJ and then a music producer. And I started making my own records and I put them in the trunk of my car and I traveled.
You just skipped over like I went to the music store, couldn't find a hip hop album. Then I started making my own music.
I guess so. I thought I dragged it out too long in the beginning. I was like trying to catch up.
No, man, this is the most important part right here. Like, how did you get into that?
Well, I found one store. It was in Costa Mesa on the corner of Bristol and Warner. It was Music Plus, and we went there, and I went in there, and it was heaven. And they had the 12-inch vinyl, just a giant row of it, of just everything I picked out was great. It was like an amazing shopping experience. My mom was like, "Yeah, you got to put at least 75% of that back." And so, but I went home, and it was life changing, and I just listened to it over and over and over. And I mean, this was way before Eminem. This was way before Vanilla Ice. This was way like I was such an outcast and a weirdo in my school, and but it did not deter me whatsoever. I was like, this is me.
Yeah.
And so I became a DJ. I would make mixtapes once it started to catch on a little bit, and I'd sell tapes at school, and then started to do some of like the school pep rallies as far as DJ. I think I got to DJ one or two of the dances, and then I got into nightclubs as an 18-year-old DJ, and then I started making records. While I was DJing, I'd bring my drum machine in, and I'd mix my records with the drum machine, so I have them both going, and then all of a sudden I was a huge hit.
Yeah.
And then I started put them on vinyl, put them on actual records, and I just started selling records out of the trunk of my car. I'd go to the record plant. Hey, this is what I want to press next. They'd give it to me. I'd put it in the trunk of my car. And you're from Southern California, so you might understand what this route looked like. But I'd start in Irvine, and I'd make my way up north, all the way up PCH, hit all the way through San Francisco and Oakland.
Holy moly.
Stopping at all these different record stores. And I'd come back down through the Inland Empire, through San Bernardino and Riverside.
Yeah.
And then hit all the way to San Diego, and then come all the way back up. And that was my route for a week. And all I was doing was I was putting all these records in all of these stores on consignment.
Yeah.
By the time I got back, it was time to replenish records and then go pick up payment for all the records that had sold. So I did that for probably a year and a half. That was for like 3 out of 4 weeks of the month. That was my whole existence. And there was one day where I got an order from a distributor, and I didn't really even know what a distributor was. And when I was selling 5-10 records per store, this distributor says, "I need 600. And I was like, that was the jackpot. I was like, oh my God, all at once? And so I did that, and I didn't want him to, I wanted to impress him, and I wanted to keep this going. So I got on the phone to all the stores in the United States and started selling the records for him. I just started faxing him orders. Like, send it here. They want 5. They want 10. They want 10. They want 10. And
that's hustling. That's great.
Yeah. And I come from a family of civil servants, bunch of police officers, a bunch of firefighters, a bunch of aerospace engineers that worked for the government, stuff like that. Not a single entrepreneur in the whole family. So I don't know where I got it from, but it was very natural and instinctive. It never read it in a book or anything. And so I did that. And within 24 hours, he sent me another order for 1,000 because he had already sold them out because of my orders. And that was oh, wow, okay, this could be something. It's a lot more fun to sell 1,000 at a time than 10 at a time.
And is this is you as an artist, or are you representing another artist at this point?
What I was doing, well, in hip hop, they have the DJ battles, right? The scratching and stuff like that. So I was making battle records specifically for those battle DJs.
Gotcha.
Which, I don't know, based on my sales, I would say there's probably 10,000 of those in the United States, and probably 8,000 of them every single time bought my records. So there was that. And then there's one day I got a call from EMI, major label distributor, and said, "Hey, we hear what you're doing. We'd love to sign you." And I got a big, I think it was 22, 23. And they sent me an advance for $100,000. And I thought that was for music?
Yeah.
Oh my God, advance? So that did really well. And, I did that for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to produce records or produce artists. And I produced a lot of compilations, like DJ hip hop compilations. And then this thing called the digital download that you alluded to came along.
Yeah. Did you see that coming? Because I mean,
Not
it's
at
a
all.
case study. It's a Harvard Business Review case study for the executives kind of turning a blind eye to it. Now that'll go away, and just losing it.
Roger,
What did it feel like being in that?
I was out of business before I knew what was happening.
Wow.
It was like that because, because we were like independent hip hop. We weren't like, this was kind of the rise of like NWA and the gangster rap and everything, right? That wasn't what we were doing at all. We were very much independent type music, and rock has its version of that. Dance music has its version of that. And of course we had our version of that. And that audience that embraced that independent artist, they embraced the digital download first. They were way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Right. So I say within 6 months, we were completely out of business. I remember there was a moment in time where we would sell records. Every time we pressed a record, we'd press maybe 50, 60,000 of them, and they would just go out globally.
Yeah.
They would just go out. And, then we get small little reorders along the way. But we did that for so long, and we could just always count on a nice big check every time we did a shipment.
Yeah.
And there was one day where we had the truck backed up to our office and had a giant pallet of records. There were returns.
Wow.
And then like the next day we got another giant pallet. Like, where are all these coming from? So what was happening is the sales inside of the store had stopped so suddenly for that type of music that all of the record stores globally were sending all of the records back that they hadn't sold and then asking to use that as credit to buy the new ones.
Oof.
So it stopped the funds instantly.
Yeah.
And so that's from that moment, I would say 6 months was our runway, and we were out of business. I was like, gosh, I'm done. I guess
that is scary.
People don't buy records anymore.
Yeah.
And that's how quickly it happened. And we don't, I mean, in hindsight, it's crystal clear, but at the time we're like, gosh, I guess hip hop's had its day. No more vinyl.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. And the wife left because she didn't like that with no income anymore.
Sure.
And then I got left with all of her debt, and she brought a bunch of baggage to that marriage, and I had to file bankruptcy. That was in 2001.
Wow.
And it was a big one. Because when you're in the music business or any type of publishing business, you have to file bankruptcy against projected claims, not just existing claims. And so I owned all the rights to all this music, and so I had artists on a bunch of stuff, and so it was a big one. It was millions and millions and millions of dollars in this bankruptcy, and
wow,
I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. At that point, I was 34 years old.
This segment is sponsored by Rockbox Fitness Franchising. Take control of your destiny and join the boutique fitness revolution with Rockbox Fitness. If you're ready to make a real impact in your community and own your own business that empowers people to achieve their best life, then Rockbox is the opportunity you've been looking for. They provide comprehensive support from site selection, upfit, training, and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with confidence and a strong recurring revenue member base. Visit rockboxfitness.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more about this exciting venture in the fast-growing boutique fitness industry. It's time to turn your passion for fitness and for business into a thriving venture. Okay, so you're 34. The rug gets pulled out from underneath you. No one really saw that coming because there were some really high paid, really well-educated people that just were in denial.
iTunes did not exist. It was not in the ethos. It was not in our vocabulary at the time.
Yeah. Crazy. So you have to file bankruptcy. You're 34. Sounds like a divorce. Like everything that can go wrong has just gone wrong.
Holy, I'm starting life from scratch. Yeah.
What do you do next?
Well, I gotta eat, so I just went out into the job force to see what there was, and quickly found out that I wasn't qualified for anything. For them, right? I didn't have credentials, or I didn't have a work history. They didn't have an old boss that they could call and confirm employment, and so I looked at the selling cars and selling insurance. I worked at a temp agency for a long time because I could type really fast. So I was typing. I was a typist, and did
I
that.
mean, it's
And
just crazy going from making millions to,
Mhm.
and I can see that though. You have all these skills, but they're not documented. There's not this chronological resume. There's just a
Right.
guy out there making it happen.
Yep.
But a guy out there making it happen doesn't get a lot of credit when he goes into the normal workforce, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was no Gary V to turn to, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what's the next move for someone like me that knows how to hustle, right? There was
Yeah.
no social media or anything. Like you were just
No.
kind of out there in a desert all by yourself.
Yeah.
And if I went to one job and applied just rejection after rejection, but applied it at the Ralph's grocery store in Manhattan Beach, and they had just gone on strike. So lucky me, there was an opening, and they were starting at $22 an hour. And my whole reference point to an hourly wage was when I was 15 years old. I washed golf carts. You're from Irvine, Rancho San
Yeah.
Joaquin Golf Course,
Sure.
right there.
Sure.
So when I was 15, I would get up at 4 in the morning. I'd bike to school. I'd wash the carts. I'd go to school. Then I'd come back and clean all the carts and plug them back in and do it all over again. So, but that was $3.15 an hour. And so I thought, well, at least it's $22 an hour. That's not terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until you got your first check. And you're like, who's this guy FICA and why is he taking out so much money?
Exactly.
But it was really a tough time. I mean, you said humbling experience. It was a bitter experience. I was mad and angry at the world. I blamed everybody and everything for where I was in life.
Yeah.
It was everybody's fault. And then after about 6 months of that, I was like, kind of woke up. Wow, it looks like nobody's coming to save me.
Yeah. Cavalry's not here.
And there were no shortages of shoulders to cry on. Lots of empathy to go around, but there was no help.
Yeah.
And so, as you alluded to in the intro, the grocery store manager, who he was also 34 years old. I was 34 years old. And he had been there since he was 16. So he was only 2 years away from hitting his 20-year mark when he was going to be able to retire drawing 70% of his salary for the rest of his life.
Wow.
So, like, he was just finishing. And I was like, I was just starting.
Yep.
But we had a lot in common. And so we talked a lot. And he said to me one day, he said, "Man, come up here and let me show you." So we went up to his office and he pulled out a photo album. You remember photo albums, don't you, Roger?
Sure.
We actually put pictures and pages and looked through them like in a book. And he had a picture of a couple apartment buildings that he'd been able to acquire. And he was very proud of them, like they were his kids. And he says, in 2 years, I'm going to be out of here and I'll get my 70% of my salary for the rest of my life. But you know what? These 2 apartment buildings will pay me more than what that salary will pay me.
Wow.
And that's where he said these words. And you almost got it right. It's not passive income. Yep. He said real estate is the final frontier where the average person has a legitimate shot at creating real wealth. And those are just pivotal words for me at the moment because I really missed my money. I mean, that was really tough. I mean,
People say money doesn't buy happiness. Maybe not, but man, it gets you right to the front door. It gets you right to the front door of happiness. You still have to open the door, but it gets you right there.
Yeah. I mean, I've been rich and poor, and rich is better.
Yep.
Okay?
Amen.
Regardless of how your emotions are at the time or what you're dealing with. Yep. It's easier to deal with problems when you have the money.
So he gives you this sage advice.
Yep.
What are you thinking as you walk out of his office that day?
Well, there's 3, pivotal words in that statement. Real estate is the final frontier. I was like, wow, this is it. I've been looking in all the wrong places. This is the last one. Okay, there's a shortcut. And he said for the average person, and at that point in my life, at 34 years old, bagging groceries, I felt far below average. And then to make real wealth. And I was like, okay, real wealth, legitimate wealth. So that was just like all arrows just pointed to that. I think the next day the strike ended. And so he came to me and said, "Hey, we'd love to keep you. You've been a great worker and I'd love to keep you around. But now that the strike's over, you have to go union and you're gonna have to start at $7 an hour." Wow. To do the job that $22 an hour wasn't paying. And I was like, okay, there's my sign. There was my kick out the door. And I took a bottle of wine home that night and went home and searched everything real estate. And by the time I was all done searching, I'd come across an estranged aunt. I hadn't seen her in probably 15 years. She was in Seal Beach, California. And found out that she'd been like the #1 real estate agent there for 27, 28 years. And so I hadn't talked to her. I was kind of nervous, but I was filled with liquid courage by that point. And just fired off the email and said, "Hey, it's me. What's up? I heard you do real estate." And in the morning, she had responded. We had lunch that day, and within 24 hours, I was in real estate agent school.
Wow.
So that's how the
Wasted no
transition
time.
from music to real estate happened.
Yeah. So, and then how did you start acquiring and building, your business in real estate?
So I was an agent for probably 3.5, 4 years. And right at the end of that 4 year, I did okay. I did well. But right at the end, I had a couple clients that gave me repeat business over and over and over again. And if anyone has any experience as being a real estate agent, you like those clients. Those are the best kind. You don't have to work. They just keep on sending you orders. Buy this, make an offer on that. Here, list this, sell that for me. And there was one Saturday, it was the real pivotal moment too here, where I was meeting them at 10:30 a.m. on a Saturday. I was all dressed up in a suit and tie. I had a bunch of paper laid out on the desk ready for them to sign. And I'm there punctual, looking sharp, and they're professional. And they showed up, I don't know, 20 minutes late, and they're in jeans and a t-shirt. They signed all their paperwork, and then they took off to enjoy the weekend. And then I was sitting there on the weekend having to process their paperwork, and then I had to go hold one of their houses open, and then I had another one of their houses the next day. And I was just like, I looked at the closing statements. I was like, compared their profits to my commissions.
Yep.
And I started thinking about that grocery store manager. I was like, you know what? I'm sitting on the wrong side of the desk.
Yeah.
If this is really where all the wealth is at.
Right industry, just wrong side of the desk.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want what they're doing. And so being a real estate agent does nothing to prepare you to be an investor, not a darn thing. And anyone that thinks there's some similarities, there's not. There really isn't. And so I made a huge investment in this educational program to, I think it was $23,000. That was in 2005, 2006 or 5, which was just unheard of at the time. I mean, those types of programs are all over the place now. But at the time it was just, and everyone, friends, family, all thought I was an absolute fool and ridiculous, thought I just got scammed or something. And I remember going home for the holidays and my grandma said, well, are you going to get like a certificate or anything? I was like, no. Well, do they have like a job placement program? And they're like, no, that's not what this is about. And it was about that time where I was given that little book. I bet you've never heard of it. You want to write this down? Called Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, of course. Book? Of course. Yeah, of course.
Right. The transformational book for everybody.
Yeah.
And it taught me two things. The first thing was kind of just what passive income is. I speak English like you. I can take the word passive and income and put them together and kind of figure out what it means, but I'd never really been taught it, not as an intention. And then a new definition of wealth is not having a bunch of money in the bank like I had been become accustomed to having. It was actually having more revenue coming in each month that's not dependent on your actual efforts, that exceeds your monthly expenses. And I was like, oh, wow, I never want to be here again. So I'm going to change course. And that's what I'm going to pursue, was passive income through real estate.
Yeah. And
I was probably 3.5 years. I had suppressed my expenses as low as I could. And I got my passive income through real estate up. And in 3.5 years, I escaped the rat race. Wasn't wealthy, wasn't rich by any means, but I was free.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go to work. And comparing those two, now having lived two different lifestyles, one where I had a big bank account, but I definitely had to go to work every day.
Yeah.
And then having just a marginal bank account and not having to go to work, I like that one better.
Wow.
I liked it far better. So I don't guess back to your statement of money doesn't buy happiness, but not having to work, that buys a lot of happiness.
Sure. Free choices, right? Like just having choice. That's
choices, exactly.
Yeah. I would love to know. So everyone that goes through a pretty traumatic change. And I would say that your industry being evaporated overnight is a pretty traumatic change to somebody professionally and then, emotionally and personally. What was your biggest learning? Like if you had to offer the listeners the lesson without the scar, right? If you wanted to give the listeners of this show the lesson without having to get the scar, what would that lesson be?
There's probably a bunch if you gave me long enough to think about it, but the one that comes to mind immediately is be intentional about creating your own environment. Who you spend your time with. And that's become a little bit of a cliche. You're the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. But in hindsight now, I'm 55. I can look in the past and like every single key moment had to do with who I was spending my time with.
Yeah.
And, I probably spend $100,000 a year on masterminds and education. And if they would have taught us that, if they would have given us this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, in high school, okay, let's just kind of delay Catcher in the Rye for a second, and let's just slide in Rich Dad Poor Dad. That could have made a huge difference. It would make a huge difference for so many people.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, they just said, hey, if you weren't born with, with rich parents or in a rich community, did you know you could buy your way in, and it's an amazing shortcut? And I didn't learn that till, my mid 40s. And that was huge when I discovered what a mastermind was.
Yeah.
And I found like the more expensive ones that there were, the better the people I met. And, the better the ideas that came up. There was no one, poo-pooing your ideas.
Yeah.
The resources were there to get it done. New ideas were evolved to make it better. The people were there to bring it together. And I was like, oh my God, what a hack. What a life hack.
Yep.
So I think that would be the biggest lesson in hindsight. If there was a second place one of this could be tied, would be just not to ignore technology, right? Because around that time when the digital download, just before that, maybe a couple of years before that, there was, the internet was just coming online, right? And, a basic website cost you $5,000-7,000 to get that made by some professional designer, and it still looked like doggy do. And, but I was like, no one's ever going to go buy records online. You know what I mean? Like, they love the smell of the vinyl, and they want to walk through the store, and they want to dig through and read the liner notes and everything. And I didn't think that was even remotely possible, but it beat me right upside the head.
Well, it's just kind of funny with the vinyl specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm about the same age. We grew up, there was a whole experience of going to the record store. You went through all the albums, and the artwork on the front of the album was everything. And, you'd read all the liner notes, and there was really a physical experience listening to the music. And then, cassettes came out, and then of course CDs. And so we replaced all our vinyl with CDs. And then later we replaced all our CDs with digital, a digital offering of it. And now my kids are grown now, but when they were in their teenage years, I wanted them to experience vinyl the way I did. So I ended up rebuying,
Nice.
Back in Black and Appetite for Destruction. I've bought it on cassette, on vinyl first, then cassette, then CD, then digital, then back to vinyl.
Back to vinyl.
A lot of money off me, but it is funny how vinyl has come back. And I'm not a believer that it's a better audiophile experience. I don't experience it that way. But damn, is it cool to go pull a physical product out, put it on the turntable, put the needle down. Like, there's just something to that.
Yep, I agree. And I didn't think that was an experience that anyone would ever want to go without.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite memories of seeing my son, who was like 14 at the time or something, at 12, 14, go put a Beatles record on, put on Sgt. Pepper's, and just put the needle down. I was like, that's the way it's supposed to happen. That's the way it's supposed to happen. Yeah. Well, if you can, Matt, if you have a lesson from real estate. So we talked about, the lessons you learned from the pretty dynamic change, but you've also learned some lessons as you've built this real estate portfolio. What's another great lesson you could give to the listeners if they're looking to get into real estate, which is just a no-brainer to have at least a part of your portfolio, but
right.
What have you learned?
It started that way, Roger, the way that you're saying that, I went to my real estate education school with one guy that we became pretty close. He was a financial planner, former financial planner. And the reason he had decided to pursue real estate is because after meeting with so many people at the kitchen table, he had just saw like really the only people that stood a chance at a retirement without having to drastically reduce their lifestyle were people that had at least one or two pieces of real estate. That was like the common denominator. And the ones that had more were far, far ahead of everybody else. So that was initially like why, I got into it for the money, right? I just shared that with you. But I stayed in it because, this is where I'm supposed to be anyway. This is like my only real shot.
Yeah.
And then, but as it's evolved in kind of a much higher level view of it, if you look at how our society is, our economy and our financial system, it's debt-based. It's designed to be inflationary. And really the way to get wealthy now is because to borrow a depreciating asset to purchase an appreciating asset, right? And that puts you on the right side of the economy. It puts you on the right side of the financial system. And we know the financial system, it always wins. There's that famous saying, don't fight the Fed, right? And so now my real estate conversation, I mean, I talk about real estate a lot, but it's really a money conversation just disguised as a real estate conversation.
Yeah.
And the reason real estate has produced so much wealth for so many people is because without them even knowing what's happening, like on this macroeconomic level, without them even knowing it, it still checks all the boxes. So you go to the bank and you get a loan, you put 20% down, you put 80% in, and you take 30 years to pay that. That you just borrowed a depreciating asset to buy an appreciating asset. And then if you use that as a rental, so now you borrowed a depreciating asset to purchase an income producing appreciating asset. Like, you can't work enough hours to keep up with that over time.
Yeah.
And just as inflation destroys the purchasing power of the money that we have in our savings accounts, it also deteriorates the value of the debt that you borrowed.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
So it's an equal opportunity money destroyer. It destroys the bank's money just as quickly as it destroys yours.
Yeah.
And so, over time, a perfect example, if no one can really embrace that, and I have to explain this a lot of times in a lot of different ways to a lot of people because they don't really get it. And it was kind of far out there for me too. But if you look at like when you went and bought your first house, most people they stretch a little bit and they're a little nervous. And they're like, oh my God, are we ever going to be able to afford this monthly payment? 5 years down the road, it's like, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Right? 10 years down the road, oh my God, can you believe how little I pay for this house? You know what I mean? And so that's the power of inflation working against your debt because your income has gone up and your assets have gone up and all the businesses and the whole system is generating more money. And so it makes that debt from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, so much easier to manage. So you're paying, last year's debt with today's inflated dollars.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by ThriveMore Autopilot. The latest data shows a large amount of small to mid-sized business owners are living paycheck to paycheck, and that is not why you started a business in the first place. We all start businesses to create the freedom in our lives that we want and to give us options. But to do that, you need more leads, and you need to turn those prospects into long-term paying customers. Well, the solution is ThriveMore Autopilot. ThriveMore Autopilot is the turnkey solution to take the stress and the hard work out of new customer acquisition, which is the lifeblood of any small business. ThriveMore Autopilot works on your behalf to generate a waterfall of new leads through various channels, to nurture those leads with proprietary AI solutions that mimic human interaction, to sell memberships and help you increase your monthly recurring revenue, and they even provide you coaching and your team coaching on the most effective sales techniques and give you a community of other like-minded business owners. ThriveMore Autopilot is how you scale your business without stress and the relentless phone calls and texts and reach outs to the prospects to get them to show up for that first appointment or to show up to that call. So learn how ThriveMore Autopilot can help you win big by going to thrivemore.ai. That's thrivemore.ai. ThriveMore Autopilot, the strategic partner for small to mid-sized business owners to help you scale and live the life of your dreams. Matt, I have read, of course, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but several Robert Allen books, like a lot of real estate books. And just your explanation of it right there was so perfectly clear. And I've never thought about you're using and you're borrowing a depreciating asset to buy an appreciating asset. Like that's just, people don't think about inflation that way, but you're truly taking an asset that's going to depreciate and you're putting it into something that will appreciate. That is a brilliant explanation, man. Thank you for that.
I mean, I wish I thought of it, but but if you take it even deeper on a bigger level, it's how every government in the world works.
Yeah.
Our government is not. They have no intention of ever paying that debt back.
Mm-mm.
They intend on inflation paying it back.
Yep.
Right, and that's how every government operates. So,
it
just puts you on the right side of the system. So if you can't beat them, join them.
Exactly. Don't hate the game. Don't hate the player. Hate the game. Yeah. All right. So I always ask three similar questions as we start to wrap up an episode. One is, and you've already named one book, so you can't name that one again. But is there another book that you read that, Matt, it had a profound impact on you? And when you set it down, like, okay, I will never think about this subject the same way. And it could be on any subject, any It could be this year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whenever you read it. But what would you recommend?
So I've always had three favorite books when I'm asked this question, and Rich Dad was obviously one.
Yeah.
Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins, I think, was a huge one. I've read that multiple times. I think I read it every year for the first 10 years that I owned it. And then the other one would be a book called The Slight Edge. I think it's Jeffrey Olson. I think is his name. And I think that book right there, whether it's real estate or tomato gardening, whatever it is that you're into, The Slight Edge is like the perfect companion book for that.
Okay.
And it just shows how incremental changes amount to massive momentum and create big changes over time. Conversely, probably what makes the book most powerful is the lack of those incremental changes send you the other direction over time too. So the whole book is based on every decision matters. And so whether you decide to do something or not to do something, it matters. And so you start looking at life completely different, especially if you have ambitions or goals and you're trying to achieve something. It has a huge impact. So that's a good one. But I'd say out of the fourth book that I've added that I think is probably my favorite right now is Mike Michalowicz's book, Profit First.
Yep.
Especially for entrepreneurs. Because if you're making this transition into becoming an entrepreneur, it's really easy just to make a lot of money, get excited, and you're making money, but that money's going out the door as fast as it's coming in. And it can be a trap all by itself, just as much as the rat race that corporate America could be. But if you pay yourself first and you automate those payments and you make that money just a little bit inconvenient to access, you'd be surprised on how much wealth you build, how fast $50, $100 a week amounts to, how quickly it ramps up. And when you automate it and you just get used to living off of what's left in your actual bank account, because you have these little automated payments going out to, say, your tax account and your stock account and then just your savings account, just you never even notice it. And that book was, I wish I would have had that book when I first became an entrepreneur, because I think life would look very, very different for me now.
Yeah. No, great recommendations. Thank you. If I were to give you a magic wand and you could make one material change to the world. So Matt, I'm going to give you this wand and tonight you wave it and you change the way that people are or the world operates or whatever it is, but you get one change. When you wave that magic wand, we wake up tomorrow. How is the world different according to Matt?
I think if people did what they said they were going to do, I think that would impact everybody positively and equally.
Congruence. Yeah. Yeah. Simple, short, wonderful answer. And I'm going to change the last question because I just have to know. So when you were in the music business, was there ever a crazy moment of like I can't make this up kind of thing that happened to you when you were in that business?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some, and the more I think about it, the more it come to mind, but I'll just say this one because I think it might be the most recognizable and the most relatable, is that I had a record by Eminem on my label probably 5 years before he was famous.
Wow.
And I really didn't like that rap style.
Sure.
And today I think he's the greatest rapper ever lived. And that's debatable. It's like who's the best basketball player ever lived. But I really do. I think he's one of the greatest ever. And to the fact that I had his record on my label and I passed it up. So that you can't make up.
No.
Right?
No. I've seen him live twice, and I think what's underappreciated is how damn good he is live. His records are amazing, but like live, he puts on a just crazy good show.
He's extraordinary. He's definitely extraordinary. Love him or hate him, you can't deny the talent.
Nope. Well, hey, most important question, because you are a success coach as well. You have this offering for people. Where can people find you? How can they be part of your journey? Get a hold of you.
Sure. I mean, if you're listening to our podcast here with Roger, then I have my show is Epic Real Estate. It's the longest running real estate show on the podcast webs. Fantastic. So it started in 2009. You imagine you had to explain to people what a podcast was back then.
Podcast.
And so there's that. And then Epic Real Estate as far as our website.com. And then my YouTube channel is probably the biggest place where I have my presence is Epic Real Estate at YouTube.
Fantastic. We'll put all those in the show notes too.
Awesome.
So that they're there for the and your book recommendations too. Matt, This has been a pleasure, and it's been a fun interview because it's spanned so much real estate, no pun intended, but it just spans so much that it's been really cool to learn about your journey and your path, and just man to rebuild your life literally from $7 an hour ground up at 34. It just speaks to your tenacity. So thank you so much for sharing your time today.
Thank you, Roger, for having me. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.